welcome everyone to a brand new episode for Startups Thursday. And we have here Mohit Mishra. So, welcome to the show. Mohit, why don't you
Thank you.
kick it off by telling us a bit about yourself?
Yes, thank you for having me on the show. My background has been particularly in mobility and transportation, but that did not start off as I planned to. I graduated with a major in computer science and engineering from IIT BHU back in 2015. And then I was hired by a US company, but the H1B never worked out. And I ended up, life would take me to Europe in a very weird fashion. That would be that a friend of mine and I, we were on a Europe trip. We helped another friend who asked for some help, and when we came back, and he said, "Hey, I got some corporate funding. Would you like to join back?" And we said, "Hey, let's join you." So that's how I ended up in Netherlands, which was a completely unplanned way to start off in the mobility space. And since then, I've been working entirely in the mobility space, which the career started off as a tech lead at this particular Dutch startup, building connected cars applications, and then connected fleet maintenance products, then mass products, which is mobility as a service. How do you integrate all modes of mobility into one interface? And then moving on to being an entrepreneur in residence at the inaugural Antler cohort in the Netherlands. That was back in 2019. It didn't work out as I had planned, but I was just a 26-year-old guy, nothing to lose at all. And that kickstarted another set of journey. Moved on to another Dutch startup as a CTO, which was about organizational behavior change. How do you change the behavior of employees to travel to their work by other modes of transportation, not by the personal car? So that was a great learning, combining human behavior science, human, and then together with technology, and then having multi-stakeholder management involved. So that was a quite an insightful journey. Um, in the process, by late 2020, I gave up my car to completely depend on public mobility. And that meant that I had to install a number of applications. The good side was my carbon emissions dropped from 150 grams per kilometer to less than 5 grams per kilometer. But that was not so easy because it came with installing multiple apps, juggling between multiple systems, going around different countries with different languages. So that was a bit of a chaos in my life. But that also meant an opportunity in the sense that I started to toy around, okay, why is that these disconnected mobility ecosystems so different? I mean, you could be on Gmail, I could be on Yahoo, but we don't have an aggregator in between that connects the both of us. We just talk. So, can this be done to mobility? And that was the genesis how we started Automical. It started off as a research problem, and then I asked my co-founders, "Hey, this is what I've been toying around," and they joined the venture, and that's how we started off. So that's been a bit about me, my background, and my journey. And if you don't see me working, then you'll find me either reading books on philosophy or playing my piano, guitar, and flute. That's about me.
I'm sure you're good at that too, for sure, right? Thank you for that intro. Anthony, do you want to kick off the next?
Yeah, so Mohit, for those who don't know, you and I met, what, 3 months ago, 4 months ago, in Bangalore, and obviously your journey started in India, and you know your Europe trip is probably one of the more unique Europe trips where you started a company at the end of the day rather than just going and clicking pictures and doing other things, I guess. But you also mentioned the whole H1B, and I mean, all this happened by chance, or life took you in a certain direction, right? So, can you tell us a little bit about when the whole entrepreneurial bug hit you versus, because I mean, you had other plans, like you said yourself, right? I mean, and what's it like to be a CEO, and would you do anything different right now that you've been in a startup, been on this journey? Talk to us a little bit about just being a CEO of a startup.
Yes, that's a big question. Well, I think the entrepreneurial bug literally kicked in when this Antler cohort was just beginning up. I learned about it over LinkedIn. I thought, well, there's nothing to lose here. I was pretty young. I'm still young, but and the thought came in, hey, there's nothing to lose here. I'm just here to gain everything. simply because I did not do any startup as such before. I was more of a developer. I was coming from a technical background. It would be great to be amongst a group of, in a group of really smart folks, way more experienced than I was, and to learn from them. So that's how I applied to Antler, and then we had went through some rounds of interviews, and I got selected. So that was the bug that bit me back then. It meant that it did not translate into a startup right away, but it did kick me off into a direction that meant more focused. As I was doing mobility, then I got more focused into mobility. Then, as part of that Antler group, I was already I met a number of people to bounce back ideas. So it helped me to grow from a developer into more combining technology and business together. So that was quite a good, let me put it this way, MBA in a crash course. So that, and then now when I started with this Automical, I'm still learning a lot, especially from my mentors, from my investors, from my advisors. There's much to learn. So the way I look at it as a journey, as a CEO in my journey, it looks to me that I'm flying a plane and there are advisors around me who are at flight control places who are helping me find the direction go so that I don't crash the plane. That is how I would like to put this journey right now.
That's
That's
a great analogy. I was gonna say it's more like NASA's launch center in Houston, but I mean, the flight works as well. So, I think for those of people who don't know about Atomical, Mohit, let's go back a little bit, right? I think we it's important to talk about. I think the problem is clear. I think both Riddhi and I would agree that instead of opening five different apps, let's say, for example, I mean, I live in the Bay Area. If I want to go to say Pier 39 in downtown San Francisco from where I live, I probably have to use public transportation. I have to probably change five different times to get to my final destination and five different apps to get to my final destination, right? So you're trying to overcome that by making it seamless, simply put, right? I mean, saying one app, why can't it all talk to each other? Let's say, for example, WhatsApp is my favorite messaging app. I could go in, I could request for something. I mean, everything is seamless. I'm probably condensing the whole thing. I mean, you're probably going to touch on that. So, who is Atomical aimed at? Is it the developer ecosystem? Is it businesses? Maybe touch on that a little bit so that people know what to look for through Atomical, and then we'll probably double click on that. Go ahead.
Yeah, so as such, Atomical offers a platform as a service for cities, businesses, and developers so that they can integrate with different mobility services and they can offer mobility as a feature or mobility as a service or add ons to their own end users. Well, as while that is the solution that we provide, the problem is a little bit more nuanced if you look at it. It's not just different applications that you will have to um, merge together in order to get from point A to point B. But think about this way. In the next 10 to 15 years, we are going to have two and three people living in cities. That means it translates to the mobility demand tripling, which effectively means with situation as it is, it means more cars on the road. But cities don't grow as quick as we are growing in the cities. And they're struggling to bring these mobility services together so that they can cater to the needs of their own residents as well as tourists coming in and going out. Cities naturally struggle with how do we solve this problem so that it's easier for people living in the cities or people coming in and out of the cities to move around, while businesses, there are multiple business cases wherein businesses would like to offer mobility as a service or feature, not necessarily as a mobility application. They could be non-transport application as well, but they do have business case, but they simply cannot do it because there's no easy way to interact with different mobility operators. And that's exactly where Atomical comes in. Despite today's despite the consumer spending on mobility today, on ground transportation today, exceeding $1 trillion, there's literally no easy way to integrate mobility services into, let's say, your WhatsApp, or let's say into Airbnb, or let's say into your car rental application, or let's say into your on booking.com. They always have to struggle with finding the right solutions, or there's no off the shelf solution. There's no Stripe for mobility available today, and that's exactly what Automical does. So with that explanation, it is really just as Stripe created this digital payments infrastructure for the internet, we are creating that digital mobility infrastructure for the internet.
That is good. So hopefully by the time I get there, hopefully it's a better path, right?
I hope so.
Yeah. And was it like, thanks for giving that visual kind of outline of how the solution works for somebody coming in. I'm assuming it is right now set up for places where there is a lot of infrastructure, right? I'm based out of Los Angeles. Our public infrastructure for especially public transport doesn't offer as many options. But I'm assuming with Europe, right, it's a good ground to get this going first.
Yes. For a developer as a business, you can think about typically when you go out to integrate with any mobility operator in general, you would end up having to spend more than about 140 hours simply in getting from the starting point of interaction after contract acquisition to actually deploying the solution with that integration. And this entire process would include getting the contract. And before even contract, you need to know to knock on the door and say, hey, I'm this particular company. Can I talk to you? And who is the right person to talk to? And then you acquire the contract with all bunch of negotiation calls that you do. And then you would be ending up with some additional um, nuances in that contract. The settlement and reconciliation process would be involved. Both parties would have to settle on that. That's not easy. Every party has some different settlement and reconciliation process. Then you would end up, most parties would ask you, operators would ask you for a deposit and a credit check. Imagine if there is a small little startup starting to build something very innovative that can really change the behaviors of people, or can improve the top line of different applications. They simply cannot integrate with them. They don't have the money. And once this is done, let's assume that you actually get your business, legal, and finance team together. Then comes the technical integration, which means you would be provided with some proprietary information and data to integrate with, often with inadequate API documentation. And sometimes those documentation don't even exist. I remember in one of such integrations we did, we had to relearn ourselves. We are computer science engineers, but we had to relearn ourselves because the technology that was used, we were never taught in our bachelor program. That was as old as that. And then you have an operator testing. You would have to do, the operator has to sign off, and then finally you would deploy your solution. So by the time you end up selling the first $1 ticket, I think you would end up spending like 100K to just get $1 ticket. And so that's the problem here in the entire ecosystem. And imagine, and there are companies already doing that, the big companies, but all of them are going through that same. So there's an integration spaghetti. There's multiple bunch of companies and then multiple bunch of transport operators. They integrate with each other. So you can imagine there's an integration spaghetti in between. How do you standardize these interactions? Just like what is open banking for the fintech sector, can there be an open mobility standards for the mobility? So we have such standards coming up, but we have a long way towards the ideal state where you could say, hey, now you can integrate with any mode of transportation in just, let's say, in 30 minutes.
Actually, I wanna ask this then, right? So you go to Europe,
Yeah.
you come back and you tell your friends and family, actually I'm gonna try and fix some of the problems I saw with the public transport, which right now is supposed to be the best out there. What was the reaction? What was their lines like? And how did you find that support?
Well, I thought that there would be some people saying, no, no, don't do that. You can be in a stable job. But my parents were saying, go for it. They did not at all had any question. They said, go for it. This is your thing. So it was a bit of a surprise for me that my parents were like the first champions before any other champion came in to support us. Um, I think that was I'm humbled to have such parents and lucky to have such parents, I would say. And then friends came and said, "Yeah, this is your thing. Go for it." They knew in a way they already knew that I'd been toying with some mobility. I had been in mobility. They saw my enthusiasm over the past few years, how I talk about mobility and all, and how I see um, simple little changes, but also building up on those changes, visualizing how the end goal could look like. That kind that also inspired them, and in a way, I did not have to fight them to say, "Hey, can I do this?" They said, "Well, do this. Don't ask us."
Kudos to that.
So Mohit, I mean, in terms of Atomical, I mean, obviously, both Rithi and I agree it's much needed sort of a solution or the next step forward in our goals for, say, uh, a cleaner world, like you said, with carbon emissions and whatnot. I mean, obviously, the urban mobility in general is becoming a big problem. Yeah, like we were talking about Bangalore earlier. Bangalore is encouraging everyone to take the metro, to help avoid some of the bigger transportation traffic issues and whatnot. And then I think just thinking about what you're saying, I mean, this just doesn't apply to public sector. It applies to the private sector as well. I mean, something maybe you and I were speaking about, the number of buses you see in the Bay Area transporting, employees from all nooks and corners of the Bay Area into the offices in the tech sector, but still people choose to take their cars into work. That could be another one. And then just beyond, urban transportation, I mean, nowadays there are electric mobikes and this and that and everything. I mean, there's so much more to connect. And then besides that, I think there's parking solutions as well, which people could use potentially, right? So I think you're barely scratching the surface, right? And speaking of barely scratching the surface, where are you with the company right now, right? I mean, in your journey, what do you see coming up in the next 12 to 18 months? What help would you like from the community?
Yes, so at the moment, what we have been doing is that our solution currently covers the whole of Netherlands. So that it was a way to prove the hypothesis that it works. There have been some pilots that we have done, and then recently we won a tender for the Utrecht province, and that is about 2 to 4 year project to work with the province itself, with the municipalities itself, to create a better solution, better open mobility ecosystem. And then we are also heading into India for what we have learned in the Netherlands specifically. The Dutch playbook shows us some opportunities elsewhere in the emerging economies, as well as in parts of developed world as well, um, specifically with parking. If you think about parking, parking is the bridge between the car economy and other modes of transportation. If you crack parking effectively, you can create that behavior change. And that's exactly what we have been working on. In India, it's quite public now. We have an MOU signed with Arcadis. That's a Dutch company, but a global consultancy firm. We are working together with them with the Make in India initiative to create the mobility infrastructure in India. At the same time, I was in the States, and part of it, what's happening there. Um, uh, we were at the United Nations conference last week, and Debbie and I, we were at there, and Debbie, so we made a bold statement, and next year we will be there again to present the project where there's an interoperable mobility ecosystem between Netherlands, Bangalore, and the Bay Area, to show that this is quite possible to actually connect different ecosystems together. And it's not so difficult as it looks like. To put that all stack up, it is quite possible to do so, and that's what we have been able to showcase back in the Netherlands. As far as our own traction goes, we have some already customers in the pipeline. We are now moving towards raising a fund round, and at the same time, we are doing a number of pilots that are about to close in some time, and that would open up a whole bunch of new sales pipeline and unlock a new pretty long sales pipeline, I would say. More details off the show.
So speaking of funding, just to be clear for anyone listening, Mohit, I mean, are you looking to raise funds from individuals or VCs, or who can approach you with any investment ideas that they might have for Atomical?
I think at the moment we are very much focused on angels and syndicates and operators uh, to get to a point where we would be VC backable. Um, the reason that we do that is simply because, of course, with various other milestones that we want to achieve and have a very disciplined way of growing, we don't want to blitzscale right away, but rather have a very disciplined approach to raising as well as getting revenue, getting customers on board. So at the moment, we are really focused on angel syndicates, operators running, and it could be pre-seed or seed VCs, but I think that we might have some chances, but Europe doesn't work that way. So we have we have talked about it. So we are really focused on first revenue and angels.
Great. Over to you, Riddhi.
I know. So, with all of this and the long paths, how do you find the inspiration to keep going? I'm sure there are ups and downs every day, right? And like you said, right, to selling the first ticket, it's still, it's a little ahead. How do you keep it going?
I think it's the motivation. Being in this industry, I definitely see how the world has to move on to, in for a better world, to have a better livable smart city. What needs to change, and somebody has to solve this problem for sure. uh, Besides that, as I mentioned, that I do have my own hobbies as well as some friends and family that keep me on track. Sometimes when there are tough, difficult times, I think my founders, they have been my best friends, my best support all day, all time. So I'm really, really lucky to also have them as founders. And as founders, we have grown very fond of each other, very, very much deeply attached to each other, we would say. Uh, Jeff has that, how do you say, Jeff has that coolness effect. He's very calm, one of the most, I would say, the most humble people that I've met in my life, as well as the most inspiring person that I would have seen. Uh, in terms when it comes to mobility. And Amit and I go back about like 13, 14 years. He was my senior at my university. So we do have that relationship, but we also have that senior junior relationship working as well. So it's a very good dynamics that way. And it just comes together to make that work. There's a lot of respect for each other and friends and family and other things. I do have a little bit of a spiritual background as well, so that also is a big time help in pushing me forward towards this journey.
That's amazing. Yeah, I know. Anthony, what other questions can we do?
Yeah, I mean, so I think the whole senior junior thing brings about a question in me because I, as a senior, I mean, how is it for Ramit to work with a junior as a CEO, and does he reject a lot of your ideas? I want to know how that dynamics goes. I mean, again, you already mentioned that you've become best friends, but I think, kidding aside, I mean, it's more about decision making, right? I mean, a lot of founders
Yes.
that I speak to, there's obviously your heart telling you certain things. Trust your gut, go with what your heart tells you, versus your numbers might say something different. I mean, early on, your numbers might be
Yes.
saying, "Oh, we're not doing very well. Don't invest more time and money there," that sort of thing. So how do you make
Yeah.
decisions, Mohit? I mean, have you come up with some sort of a mechanism that you go through to make key decisions for the company? Yeah, anything you can share?
Yeah, so as a decision making within our own team, we have come to the agreement that the final decision comes through me, which means, of course, naturally it would mean, okay, there are some big boys in the play in the team. So do they agree to it? I think as professionals, we don't look at each other being younger or elder to each other, but rather really respecting each other's opinions. So when there are some challenging opinions, we really respect because it's coming from a partner. It's not just someone else. It's really coming. from an equal partner. At the same time, um, uh, when there are when there are really heavy conversations, when we have, we do have a psychological safety net within the team because of our own bonding. So there have been a couple of challenges where we, I would not say argue, but rather debate very strongly, but at the same time completely being respectful of each other, making sure that we play that uh, good cop bad cop quite often, and that helps to create that sort of a team bonding within our. So it's, as a profession, it has never, as professionals, it has never come across whether you are young or elder to me. It's just that we respect each other and move forward with it. Outside the work, there are tons of things
Yeah,
you don't
yeah.
want to know.
So, I mean, what you said reminds me of a conversation. A couple of my co-founders in the startup I used to work in used to say they would be unhappy if everybody agreed with them. They want opposition or
Yeah.
opposing thoughts to anything that they propose because that always, nurtures a very healthy environment because you would have thought of three things. Somebody else might say, oh, there's two more things to consider and oppose a decision that you made, which makes for a healthy relationship. But at the same time, it's also important to uh, take in all those inputs and make an final decision what you think is best for the company, right? So it's a very very neat the way you guys do it.
I think one point that we have all decided from day one, it's not about the personal decision that we have to make. It's really thinking from an atomical perspective. Whether you're CEO or not, whether you're CTO or not, doesn't really matter. Does this help Atomical? If yes, okay, we go for it. If doesn't, no, change course. So that kind of mentality has really kept us going. So it's really, and within the team, there's no senior junior relationship. It does help to bring more personal bonding, but as professionals, that thing is not there at all.
Great.
I'm actually glad you said that because a lot of times, especially right, not in the startup, but people find an excuse for collaboration not to challenge ideas, and then you just go with it, right? And that's what
Yeah.
stands it apart, right? Those decision making, those solutions. So I think I that's brilliant. Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to ask you, Mohit, is you started your startup journey pretty early on. In a certain way, like you said, by chance, you had a good support from your parents and all of that. Your friends were supportive, but compared to, let's say, I would consider me the oldest here. I'm pretty old compared to you, I guess. But being the older statesman, back in the day, at least where we come from in India, going and doing your own thing was kind of frowned upon. Things have changed quite a
Yeah.
bit in India. I would say around the world as well. Kids in general are much more open to trying out their own thing right out of college. I know a few kids whom I work with. They actually don't even want to complete school. They want to be doing their startup second year of school because they're itching to get out there and prove themselves. So, which is a lot of fun to see. Which obviously there's risk and reward to it, but I think you will have a unique perspective on any advice you want to give wannabe entrepreneurs, so to speak. So any words of wisdom from you, having been through what you've been through, to say when to do a startup, what to consider, what to watch out for, any of those inputs.
Well, I'm still learning along my way, but based on my own learnings and the mistakes that I've made, um, the biggest, the key point I would say is to stay away from the wannabe thingy, but rather focus on the problem itself, falling in love with the problem and not with the solution. Because we often, our human mind often gets into that solution. Well, no, the solution would work. The solution must work, and things like that. And it's quite natural to also pivot and change strategy along the course because the problem we are trying to solve is that problem, that root problem that we want to solve. Maybe that solution doesn't work, but maybe some other solution works. So falling in love with the problem would go a long way, and then really being open to being challenged in a big way, because well, yeah, arrogance can take over very quickly. um, so my biggest, and in many ways, I do have a different way of looking things, but in many ways, I would say humility goes a long way in terms of looking at the problem as it is and respecting other people's opinion. At the same time, knowing when to say no. I think as Indians specifically, I would say we have a hard time to say no. And thank goodness I came to Netherlands because they are so direct, and I love them. They will right on your face say no, and there's nothing rude about them. So I kind of learned from them to say no, and that's totally fine because we got only what 24 hours in a day. I hope we had 36 hours, but that's not going to happen in a million years. So I think that focus, in many parts, my mistake has been the lack of focus in some ways in the past, and then really drilling down to okay, this is where I want to focus a lot more. So I would so falling in love with the problem, focus, humility. I think that alone will be the biggest criteria uh, taking the person
That
forward.
is incredible, Mohit. I mean, that's the quote for the day for me: fall in love with the problem. Because, I mean, I've been there a few times where, you develop something or you put together a solution, and the solution or the product is always looking for a problem to solve, which is the other way around, which is exactly what you said right now, which is so you got to look at it the other way based on what you said, saying, I mean, what's the pain point? How can I look at that pain point deep and say, why is it happening? What are the different ways to attack it, and then go about it versus saying, oh, here's something that's going to work amazing. So you're missing the whole problems. So just love it, Mohit. So thanks for that.
Thank you.
Anything else we missed, Reddy?
No, I was gonna say at this point, this is parenting advice. I'm like, we always keep telling our kids, right? Like, go find a solution, but we forget. Can you amplify the problem you're having, or can you even articulate the problem you're having, right? Because it's like so much. Don't tell us what the problem is. So that was a beautiful closure. No, I think we got a lot. Anthony, we can wrap up with this, at
Yeah.
least
So,
for the recording.
Mohit, thanks so much for taking the time on a Sunday. For those who probably don't know when we're recording this, right? So on a Sunday afternoon in the Netherlands. I mean, I'm a big fan of Automical, and I wish you the very best, and wish you and the team the very best. And I'm sure we'll have you here once again once you solve for some of these problems, either in Utrecht or somewhere else. We'll have you on the show again, Mohit. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you both of you. Thanks for having me on the show.